Welcome to the Defenders of Business Value, the podcast that helps business owners unlock the value they've built and exit on their terms. I'm your host, Ed Meisegland, and for the last 30 years, I've been helping business owners prepare, grow, protect, and ultimately sell their businesses. Whether you're a business owner, a buyer, or an advisor guiding others through the process, if you want to make your last deal your best one, you are in the right place. So let's get started. So I just got done with one of my favorite episodes I think I've done. There's peers in this industry, and today I got to visit with David Barnett. I've been a super fan of his from afar, and there's a few prolific people in this community that really put out great content about what's good and what's bad about buying and selling companies. And his YouTube channel, and I'll have links in the show notes, but 75,000 subscribers. He breaks down everything, and it's always good and relevant. Like I said, I've been a fan of his for a while, and he didn't disappoint. We went far over my normal time because there was just such a massive body of work he has and so many interesting things on his take of just this buying and selling world that we live in. And even though I've been in the industry for 34 years, he's one of those guys I just enjoyed listening to and talking about, just where the puck is going in this world, where the risks are. An hour from now, after you get done listening, you've got to say, man, I'm so glad I spent this hour with these two guys. So enjoy my conversation with David Barnett. David, welcome to the show.
Ed, I've been listening to this show for so long. I'm so happy to be here with you. This is great. I can't wait to do this. I'm excited.
Oh, not nearly what I am, because as I was telling you, you don't really run into too many people that have the body of knowledge in the deal-making community that you do. And so it's a little intimidating to try to figure out, what haven't you answered 100 times? That it's like, golly, you could go to any 10 things and you're going to get your answer. So right out of the gate, what is a question that you wish somebody would ask that may not have made it to the top of the list in your body of work?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And you're right. I've been on YouTube for 11 years now. I think
I saw 70,000?
Well, we just hit 75,000 subscribers, but
unbelievable.
Everyone comes into every conversation under the presumption that the business should be sold or that the owner should try to make it into a sellable state. And I think the one question nobody's ever asked me is, when should a business owner just forget about the idea of selling a business? And this is something that comes up every once in a while in conversations that I have with people, because sometimes people spend 30 years running a business and they're the manager, they're the owner, they're the head salesperson, et cetera. Sometimes it doesn't make sense because, as you know, if you start to grow a business, you could increase profit by $40,000 or $50,000 one year, and then you say, now I need to hire another person in the business, but that person's going to cost me $80,000. So the year after that, you might have a small loss in the business, but you're mostly covering the new person's salary, and then you got to grow again. And you can see where this is going, where the plan to grow it into a sellable business could be a decade-long plan. But if you don't have enough time, what might make more sense is just to figure out how you can make an extra $30,000 or $50,000 a year for the next 5 or 6 years, and then just wind it up. And that extra money you made, that's the compensation for your end of career.
There's nothing wrong with understanding the body of knowledge with exit plan. I don't have a problem with it. My problem is that if you're not going to actually do the service, I don't want to say it's misleading, but it implies that you have a service that you perhaps aren't necessarily doing.
It's like a car dealer calling themselves a transportation consultant, right? Don't expect them to tell you to buy a bus pass.
Yeah, no. And again, I pursued exit planning. In fact, I was the Exit Planning Institute chapter president here in Indiana. And at the end of the day, I thought we would develop a practice into, we would be more suited to do it. But I will tell you that there were more people that were just 100% focused on really working with that business owner to make the business sellable. And we're an execution shop, right? You show up, we're going to, size this thing up and let her rip and go find as many buyers as we can for it. And the same thing for everyone, right? I just looked, I was like, my number was 671. So I was the 671st person out of the Exit Planning Institute, right? To get that designation. I think they're up to like 11,000 now. Which, again, awareness of exit planning, as you know, anybody that's just even starting down that path, it's a good thing. But for me, it has more to do with the practitioner than anything else. If you're going to hang that designation out there, you sure as better be able or be willing to do so, other than say, yeah, you know what? Why don't we take a look at your accounting instead? you know? Oh my goodness. Do you bump into that a lot? I mean, you get so much inbound feedback. That's one of the really amazing things that I think your practice has, is that so many people defer to your guidance. So I'm curious to know, do you bump into that? There's so much noise and so little signal in the exit planning world.
I get people who approach me looking for advice about exit planning, and I kind of respond with the same thing that what you just said. Is I said, I help people sell a business, but I'm not an exit planning pro. And what I'll do is, when I have those conversations, I'll give people a list of things to think about. Mm-hmm. I'll say, what would the business be able to function without you there? What are your retirement goals? Like, if you can't sell this business, what does your retirement look like? I find that a lot of people will start to consume content that will give them certain ideas, and they never question how those ideas got into their head. And so one of them simply is just about the sellability of small businesses. I mean, you and I know Biz Buy Sell publishes this in their quarterly reports. Like 80% of the things that go on Biz Buy Sell don't end up selling. So for the longest time, everyone just kind of assumed, that they would get into business and one day they would retire and wind it up, and selling it would be somewhat of a lucky thing. But what happens today with the media that we have, the social media that we have, is we have these outstanding occurrences where these statistically outlying events occur with one-off businesses that are absolutely wonderful stories, but then they get represented somehow as the norm, and they are not. I've even had people in their 40s say to me, like, I want to make sure everything's set for me to have this exit one day. And I'll say, great, you have a 25-year exit planning horizon. So the first thing you need to do is make sure you take enough money out of this business so that you do not need to rely upon its sale to retire, because you have no idea what the world will look like in 25 years, if your industry will exist, if the business will exist, if anyone will be able to get a business loan at that time. Like, we don't know. And so businesses are wonderful because it's a way for us to help other people solve problems or have a more comfortable life or whatever we're doing in our business. And through solving other people's problems, we earn money, but you've got to take that money off the table in some fashion and get it into some other kind of diversified basket of investments to protect yourself and your family. These are the riskiest types of assets you can own. I'm talking about small businesses. And just from a diversification point of view, you've got to take money out in some way. That's why I always cringe when I hear people talk about how they're reinvesting in their business all the time, or, the add back stories you have with people, oh, there's no profit because I reinvested in the business. Like, I don't buy it. You've got to be able to take money off the table. And yeah, that means you're going to have a tax bill. There's no greater indicator that you are being successful than having to write a check to the tax man.
So are you seeing more of those people that it resonates, or it's like, yeah, David, I get you, but let's let it rip and see what happens?
Yeah, well, I don't think that people should give up on the idea of selling, but I think it should be seen as some kind of bonus.
Which brings me back to your first point on exit channels, right? If you need to wind this thing down, and I think that everybody assumes a liquidation is a bad thing. What's a bad thing is continuing to feed the machine, and you're reducing your cash in order to stay listed, right? Or to go procure that buyer. So you're hemorrhaging cash when you could easily contact somebody and sell the assets and call it a day.
It's the riskiest asset class that there is. You know very well, being in this business, that getting an LOI on a business can sometimes be a very tough proposition. Everyone on social media makes it sound easy, but actually getting someone to make an offer is tough. And then even if you get an LOI, then closing the deal is another function of a whole bunch of other things that could come into play, right? Those many LOIs never complete. And so you have to have, I think, as a business owner, a realistic understanding of what selling it could look like and what it's really worth. If you do have a chance of selling it and you try to go to market for an outrageously unrealistic price, then you yourself will upset your own opportunity to get out of it. And that's one of the saddest things that I see, actually.
I think valuation, it's going to get a lot easier to figure out the value of your company. And as an appraiser of 30 years, I'm sitting here saying, you know what? AI, assuming you have the appropriate inputs, it's probably going to give you a pretty decent output, right? It's been really interesting to do litmus tests. So, we go through all of our comp analysis and so on and so forth. And just for yucks, it's like, all right, let's see, can I get the same answer in 7 seconds as opposed to the last couple hours? And it's been not bad. And the only thing I can assume is as it continues to eat the body of knowledge of business valuation, it's only going to improve.
It could. I had an interesting conversation with someone the other day, and I said, if it was 2012, I think that's the correct year. If it was 2012 and you were the very first Netflix streaming subscriber, so you had streamed something on your television from Netflix over the internet, and then the very next day you had an opportunity to buy a video rental store, could there have been an opportunity for you? And the answer is yes. There probably could have been an opportunity to buy that store and run it profitably, et cetera. But you will have already seen the future. You would know that this thing isn't going to carry on, that there's some kind of time limit in place, right? Those are the questions that interest me. AI, I'm using it. It's helping me to streamline my workflow and stuff. I don't know how good a daydreamer it's going to be just yet.
Interesting. Yeah. So where's the puck going? Where do you think the deal-making puck is going? Because I saw something, and I'll let you go first, but I saw something really tremendous here in the last week or so that was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe we're here right now.
I think if anything, these new technologies are going to create a new era of easy to get going startups. And as the field of enterprises grows and things become more competitive, it could lead many people to question the value of doing an acquisition, depending on what moats exist. So you could have a very big industrial concern with a big investment in capital expenditures that could always maintain its position as a valuable entity. But as you know, increasingly we have this service economy where people are serving each other, and it's becoming easier and easier for those things to start. So I think there are general trends at play, which could lead us one way or another. I really don't know. If you had asked me 5 years ago which profession would be the first to suffer from AI, I never in a million years would have guessed fashion model. But all of the people who stand in front of cameras to have their photos taken for different reasons, they're the first ones that are suffering from AI.
Interesting. Did you do a lot of equipment appraisal in your career?
I'm a certified machinery and equipment appraiser, yeah.
So technical obsolescence, right, with machinery and equipment. I think we're going to see a technical obsolescence penalty in businesses, right? Not because of what they don't have, but not knowing what they could have, right? Meaning that there's not enough clarity in the business to figure out, okay, if I layer on, pick your tech stack, will this improve my profitability, which subsequently improves my value? I really believe that one's going to be on the forefront. Now, for our buyers in our audience, I saw a chat bot with a data room. So the AI was layered on top of the data room, and it was tailored based on the qualifications of the buyer. It would cite, like you said, look, I need to see the year-end 2025 income statement. Tell me about it. And it goes into the normal AI litany of, that's a great question. And, let me show you all the bells and whistles that it does. And it kicks it out. So to me, as I was telling you earlier, I really am interested in the role of a deal maker in the upcoming decade, because you may have to have some chops in order to survive and to add value in that process, given what AI may be doing.
Yeah, it's true. I think that if it becomes more challenging and more competitive, it could ultimately be good for people that want to use the services of a deal maker, because as you and I both know, there's a whole bunch of people in the intermediary community who really don't add a lot of value at all. It's zero barrier to entry in most places. I think it's like half the states and maybe 8 of the provinces in Canada. Business brokers have to have a real estate license, which in my opinion actually makes it worse, because by having a statute that says you need to have a real estate license to sell a business, what it does is it tells some real estate agents that they are qualified. because they hold the license. So they think, well, now I can do it, when they don't know what they're doing. I always point out to people that houses and buildings have roofs and doors and windows and foundations, and businesses have, receivables and liabilities and inventory and employees. Like they're completely different animals. Recently in November, I was asked to come and speak at a rural economic development session with a whole bunch of business owners there. And I heard some horror stories about transactions that were attempted. And the fact of the matter is that there's literally no business broker in that market. And so either the business is big enough that a broker from outside is willing to do the deal, or people that want to try to find a buyer, they end up going with people like real estate agents, and they don't know the difference. So these kinds of things happen all over the place. But in general, there are also people that are just stepping forward saying, I'm a business broker, I can do it. And if they're in a place that doesn't have any kind of licensing requirements, then it's up to the business owners to test that person. And some of them, I'm really surprised how they don't really do any kind of test to validate whether the person that they're meeting is qualified or not. I mean, people buy from others that they know, like, and trust. And so if a person who is a personable, friendly, warm, good conversationalist decided, I'm going to become a business broker, and they started to network in the old-fashioned way and shake hands and tell people what they're doing for people and how they're helping people out, like, they could easily convince some business owners that they're qualified and that they're competent. And again, it's if the business owner feels they know them, they feel like they like them, and they feel they can trust them, then there's a group of those people who are just going to buy, instead of, saying, how do I test the competency of this individual? People put more effort into evaluating whether a roofer is going to be qualified or not to fix their roof than they will for a CPA, an attorney, or a business broker. And the same kind of thing applies to the CPAs and the attorneys too. Many different attorneys are specialists in areas outside of small business, but you've probably had deals before where things have been complicated by an attorney who just wasn't familiar with deal making.
Ooh, I'm in the middle one.
Yeah. But their client believes that they're the person that's going to be able to help them through this.
Yeah. And you're right. The endorsement of somebody you know, like, and trust is one thing. That the competency to actually perform the service for which they're hired, it's another. Along the same line. So the competency test from NACVA, which is the Business Valuation Association I'm part of. So they sent around a competency test, like a working paper, like, we'll determine whether you're competent to make an opinion of the value of an asset. And I'm sitting here going, I can't believe. So now this is just valuation. We're not talking about the sale of somebody's net worth or their retirement. Yet there's nothing out there that slows it down. If anything, it only induces people to run to the service faster. And I don't know what's going to slow them down, because I don't think there's any recourse. If you're not competent, you get into this, right? What happens if things go south? Nothing.
Well, and that's just it, right? How can you attribute 100% if it's the actions of the intermediary that ruined the deal or not? The most common way that I think an intermediary will ruin a deal is, number one, by not setting a realistic idea in the seller's mind of what their business is worth. And then without that, you can't set the expectations of what the deal might look like. So, back when I was a business broker every day and I was meeting business owners, I would tell them the first step in the process is for me to do an evaluation of your business to determine what I think it will sell for. And some people would try to say, well, I want this. And I'm like, it doesn't matter what you want. It's what will somebody reasonably pay for what you have to sell. And so I would do the evaluation, and I would say, based on this evaluation, you can expect someone will offer you this kind of amount of money, and this is what the deal might look like, and this is the amount that you might have to carry in seller financing. And people would say, well, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, I totally understand you don't want to do that. That doesn't mean you're not going to have to. And it's like, people didn't like it. And some people left and went to other brokers. And then a year later, they'd come back and they would say, you know what? He listed it for wherever I asked. He told me I wouldn't have to do any seller financing. We didn't get any realistic offers. And the offers that we did get were, I didn't want to do them. And they all included seller financing, like you said. And then those people came back. And then I was able to take another kick at the can with them and present their business properly. But I always tell people that the internet allows everyone to have access to information. And right now, there is a buyer out there, a prospective buyer looking for a business just like yours. You're listening to this podcast, you've got a business, someone's looking for your business right now. That person has done research. They know what the industry is like. They know what the selling prices are like. They know what's realistic. And if you put your business for sale at an unrealistic price, that person's not going to engage with you because they're going to say that seller doesn't know what they're doing. It's going to be a big waste of my time. And so you don't get to meet the person who's qualified with the industry experience and the good net worth and the good credit score and the ability to borrow money. You're going to meet somebody else who doesn't quite understand that you're overpriced. And that person's going to engage with you. They might even give you a full price offer. And then later their banker will show them that they can't afford it. And you just waste 6 months or more.
Well, what do you think about, all of these entrepreneurship through acquisition buyers, right? Certainly in the United States, there's all kinds of people climbing over each other to buy my business, right? That gives them that false sense of that I really have leverage in this, right?
Yeah.
That I'm going to, put one against the other and I'm going to drive up the price, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's your take on this movement of romanticizing just how easy buying a business is? And from the sell side too, right?
So in 2018, I wrote a book called Smarter Than a Startup. And I wrote it because I wanted a book with the word startup in its title to talk about the idea of buying a business instead of starting one. And in that book, I put that startup culture had become like baseball culture in the 1950s, where every little boy wanted to be a baseball player on an MLB team. And I said in the early 2000s, everyone wanted to grow up to be a startup entrepreneur, right? Well, I think that this whole buying a business or buying a boring business from a baby boomer thing has become like the startup culture of 15 years ago, where there's all of this noise and content being created and all of these people selling $12,000 courses on how you can buy a business. And what's worse is you've got all of this buy a business with no money nonsense going on. All that is, if you watch any of that stuff, is it's a rehashing of the 1980s, get rich quick with real estate, come to my airport Hilton hotel weekend seminar kind of thing. It's people that are looking to feed off of the mania and the excitement. I always say to people, if you're going to buy a business, you need to know how to run one. And before we had all of this search fund and ETA and buy a business with no money stuff going on, I really think it started in a big way 5 or 6 years ago. Before that, the most common people I would meet that wanted to buy a business were mid-career people that had some kind of management experience in a company somewhere, and they had some degree of net worth through home equity and other savings, or someone who was new to the country who had some kind of professional background maybe in another country, but they couldn't get those credentials recognized, so they needed to, if you imagine like an engineer from another country, they come here, well, maybe they're going to buy a business in the construction trade because they can use their background in a contributing way in that business, even though they can't call themselves an engineer maybe. So those are the two groups of people I would meet, the mid-career professional, 45-ish kind of person, or the newcomer to the country. And today, my inbox is full of people that are 25 years old who not only have they never owned a business before or managed a business before, some of them have never even had a job. And now they're going to buy a company and run it with spreadsheets.
I'm older than you, but I had a kid about the same age as my daughter. My daughter's 23. And he comes and he goes, "Hey, I need your help. I made an offer on a business. Can you help me get it across the finish line?" Sure, I'm happy to help. Tell me about it. So he starts rolling this out. He made an $11 million offer. $11 million. And I'm like, okay, hold the phone here. Where's your capital coming from? He's like, I'll get it. And I'm like, oh, geez. And so the funny thing is, it's not funny. It's actually horrific that the seller's accountant opened a data room and there was everything. I'll bet you there's 1,000 documents in that silly thing that just opened up. He saw $11 million and this kid letting it rip. It was astounding that there is that recklessness is probably the best word.
So I point the finger at a book. There's the Harvard Business Review Guide to Buying a Small Business. Have you read the book?
I do. I have it.
Yeah. If you go back to the preface of the book, it will tell you that a small business in the eyes of the Harvard University professors is a business with a revenue of $10 million. these are university professors that are used to like the Wall Street experience, right? So for them, a $10 million revenue company is a very small business. But I don't know anyone I deal with that would call that a small business. It's an entirely different frame of reference. And in that book, they describe people, these young MBA graduates going after these $10 million revenue businesses that have EBITDAs of $1 million, and they raise money, to help with the down payment and whatnot. And when you read the book, if you're not cognizant of the fact that they're talking about $10 million revenue businesses, you might get the impression that you can pull off this methodology with a small Main Street business, but you can't. And the most important part that's missing is the fact that these graduates are able to call up friends and relatives and get them to contribute hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to these deals. Most people just do not have the Rolodex of that to do that kind of thing. And they're not prepared to run a business with a formal governance structure required to satisfy the needs of sophisticated, intelligent, wealthy people that are going to put money into this. And so most Main Street business deals are done by people who independently have a couple $100,000 or $1 million of net worth. And if they really need a partner, they're going to get somebody they know really well, a family member or a close friend. And they're not going to call that person an investor. They're going to call that person a partner because that person is probably going to have some other inputs into the business. You've probably seen those kinds of deals quite often over your career.
When you start looking at it that way, and that kind of leads me to my next question of the SBA in the United States, right? The defaults aren't that high at all.
Yet.
No, I get it. But historically, they haven't, right? Because that was my argument. It's like, geez, 90% leverage, 10-year note. I just find it hard to believe that that is going to work.
People don't default on SBA loans because of entirely what happens in a business. It's not an isolated thing. You have to look at the entire envelope of what's happening in the person's life. The problem I have with these high leverage amounts, and maybe you share this, is that number one, it opens the door to people who don't necessarily have the track record or background of discipline. Like if you had to put 25 or 30% down, it means that you need to accumulate wealth, which means that you are a disciplined operator and that you can run your household in such a way that you accumulate savings. When you open the door to 90% leverage, you reduce the threshold of who can get over, through that doorway, right? And the other problem that I have with it is that a lot of these loans end up being sold after they're originated. So when banks hold their own notes, it means that banks look at a deal and they say, not just does it qualify for today, do we believe long-term this is going to be a good note? Do we believe we're going to collect all of our payments over the next 10 years? There's a disconnect between the bank's interest and the borrower's interest, which I find fascinating. If the banks had to hold the notes, would their underwriting criteria be different?
Well, I look at it from the borrower, right? I would think that somebody would say, can I really see what this business looks like a decade from now? A 10-year note, right? Given where we're at right now, you and I just talked technological obsolescence.
How long ago was 2009? 17 years ago.
Right.
So it's been 17 years since the last big recession. Now, before that, we used to have a recession at least every 10 years. So I used to say to people, if you're going to take a 10-year loan, you have to be prepared to go through a recession because there will almost certainly be a recession over the life of your loan. We're now pushing 17 years with no recession. Some people say we're in one now. Maybe we are. And in a recession, is it reasonable to think that revenues of a business could go down 10 or 15%? Sure it is. But when you leverage a company up with 90% leverage, and you have in some of these small businesses, a 10 or 15% decline in revenues could be a 50% decline in profits. You can very quickly see that somebody, if they went through that slip in revenue, could simply not afford to either pay the note or themselves. And in my opinion, you should buy a business because you're going to make money off of it and it's going to provide for you. When you pay a price and then apply so much leverage that everything has to work perfectly, you're essentially in the same position as somebody doing a startup, except that because in a startup, we don't know if we have enough customers. And if you fail in a startup, you lose your startup capital. That's it. Most people do not go bankrupt because of that. Maybe they end up with a credit card balance or something they have to pay off. But if you borrow $1 million to buy a business and everything has to work perfectly from that point forward, and it doesn't, you lose your down payment and you still owe that money to the bank. You're certainly insolvent.
And we didn't even talk about that it's variable debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
The majority of the time, it's especially with some of the larger credit facilities, it's variable debt on the quarter. And you look at all these folks that during the last 4 years that picked up all these HVAC companies and so on and so forth. We use an SBA money. You go from 2% money or 5% money, I should say. And then now all of a sudden you're at 10%. That changes things a lot.
Absolutely.
Right.
So I'd like your opinion on this HVAC thing. And I don't know if you've shared this recently or not, but this is one of the things that I see as a symptom of like online content. All of a sudden, these HVAC businesses are hot in this buy a business community. And the belief is that there's some kind of thesis that, Amazon will never be able to do this kind of work, or it will never be able to be outsourced to people in another country. And so this is why it is 100% bulletproof, recession-proof, et cetera.
Our HVAC work. So we launched one, and within, it might have been 36 hours. I mean, we had 300 NDAs, 300.
Holy cow.
Within a week, we had 23 offers. And it was just the irrational investment behavior. It's like, what are you doing? To me, it's not sustainable. And these search funds, right? I'll put in the capital, but it's your guarantee kind of thing.
What this is ultimately is it's rent-seeking speculation on the part of the investors to the search funds. The investors are motivated to put money into the search funds because the young MBA, they're going to sign the personal guarantee on the note. But what the investors are eagerly trying to obtain is they're trying to obtain the indirect shadow subsidy that the U.S. federal government gives to these transactions. And this isn't talked about enough, I don't think. But you talked about a 90% SBA loan guarantee. If in any normal credit market, if I said I want to borrow 50% of something's value to buy it, I might get a very low interest rate. But then if I said, well, I want 70% financing, the lender's going to look at this and say, well, this is a little bit riskier now. I'm going to increase my interest rate to compensate. But then if I said I want to borrow 90%, well, then the lender's going to say, this is even riskier now. I better charge you a higher interest rate to compensate for that. But the SBA doesn't do that. They have one interest rate regardless of if you borrow 50, 70, or 90%. And this is what they're trying to obtain, is they're trying to get the lowest possible cost of capital that they can, which the SBA loan program provides for them. But the only reason the lender's willing to do it is because of Uncle Sam's guarantee. And so it is this hidden subsidy to this activity. And, you mentioned about the loan defaults. If we do go into a real hard-hitting recession here over the next year and, the economy shrinks and small business revenues go down 15, 20%, there's going to be a wave of these defaults and failures. And then what will the response be? It could likely be that SBA dials back its program to the way it looked 20 years ago, with 25, 30% down payments, requirements for seller financing. Who knows?
I hope it doesn't come to that. I often wonder, and to your point that it's not talked enough, as they're planning, they being the SBA, and they see the demand for business transitions, right? If they're sitting saying, we have no choice but to do this, right? Somebody has to buy this business. In order to continue to facilitate the economic machine, somebody's going to have to do this, right? Or
well, no, that's not the case at all because no other country has an SBA or anything like it, and deals are still done everywhere else in the world. So here in Canada, small business loans are based on the tangible assets within a business. That's it. If a business has a certain amount of machinery and equipment, then people can borrow against that. But then if you have a business with a tremendous amount of goodwill, there's largely no financing available unless it's a big enough business where someone will make a cash flow loan. But it's normal for people in other countries to have to finance 30, 40% of the deal. And you see, this is the part that's missing when you talk about your HVAC deal you just talked about, is those 30 LOIs that were received, I think you said. If the seller knew that they were holding paper for 30 to 40% in any eventual deal, it would completely change the way that the seller examined those LOIs.
100%.
they would be saying, well, who is this buyer and what is their experience in the industry? And, what are they really going to bring to the table and how are they going to manage my business more effectively or as well as I can? And that's part of maybe what's missing when you have such high leverage available in this kind of fashion.
I wonder if that's why we're seeing more rollover equity type deals, right? In lieu of that.
Well, rollover equity is often the only way that you can pay the high sticker price that someone's led to believe that they should get. If there's just no way to make a cash flow, the only thing you can do is offer to buy less than 100% of the business.
I hear you, and I don't disagree. I'm trying to think through the credit facilities here, right? You got cash, you got notes, you got self-canceling notes, you got earnouts, you got rollover equity. You've got all these different tools, as we talked earlier on this default, right? If somebody knew that, there's a 30% default rate, would you still do the deal? Would there still be an appetite for this many businesses?
Well, so let's talk about the age of the buyers. If you're a 45 or 50-year-old buyer and you have a net worth of $700,000 or $1 million or 1.2 million or something like that, right? If you go into a deal where you're going to borrow $1 million, you realize that this deal, if it goes wrong, could wipe you out. But if you're 24 years old and you don't have any net worth anyway, does it matter? Does it matter?
I get you.
It almost creates an incentive for the more speculative behavior.
I get it. So I teach over at one of our local universities, and one of the kids, I shouldn't say the kid, he was a kid at the time, he found a glass company, right? And he found the guy, he went and talked, and it was like 98% seller financed, right? And this guy, he knew the business, and he layered on technology and so on and so forth, and the guy paid him off in roughly 3 years. And it was great for everybody. It was a great success story. And I'm just curious to know if there's going to be more of that. Because I do think that, to your point, I don't see at least some of the 75-year-olds that we're bumping into, their appetite to buy into what a 25-year-old is saying, like zero. Like, it's like, if you write me a big enough check, we got something to talk about. But I'm not seeing it.
Well, in the situation you described, I'm guessing that the number one, the price was a reasonable one.
Yeah, sure.
And number two, the seller thought that the buyer was coachable enough to listen to what they had to say about how to run the business and make it successful. And so the seller obviously trusted the buyer to be willing to finance it under those terms. And so you had a relationship there. And that's what I think is missing from a lot of the conversations when we're talking about these transactions, is you've got strangers off the street making these offers versus some sort of transfer internally where you have an established relationship between two people. There's a great example. It's on my blog site. I've got a tab called Buy a Business with No Money, and it's got all the real reasons why these different things that these online gurus say can't work. But one of the examples I have on there is a video I made based on a bank advertisement, and the bank was BDC, and they basically talked about a transition that they financed. And the buyer was the manager of the business, had known the seller for a decade or something, and had been running the day-to-day. And they went to the bank and basically said, how can we do this deal? But the buyer doesn't have any money. And so what they did is they leveraged up the company as much as they could with the company's assets. And then a big bank loan was issued to the company, and they issued a dividend to the seller, making the equity worth much less because the debt was now in the business. And then the seller financed the sale of those shares. The buyer then started managing the business and eventually paid off the seller. And I use that example all the time when I'm talking with people, because the only way that was ever able to work was because of the 12-year relationship between the buyer and the seller and the absolute trust between the two parties and the bank's familiarity with the business. The bank had been doing business with them for years, and all three of them saw how this would fit together, and they were willing to do the deal.
Well, I'll tell you, and I don't know if you're seeing it in your neck of the woods, but from where we're at, I think we're going to see more of that. And I think we ought to promote more of that your buyer may be sitting in your business today. Here in Indiana, we've got a new director of entrepreneurship. And that's one of the big things, especially in the rural areas, right? Mm-hmm. Where people don't want to go, but they need an exit in order to retire or pick whatever path they're going to choose. And I think that is a excellent vehicle to get you out. And it certainly reduces the risk in the deal. You're not going to have attrition of customers because everybody knows you. And we're seeing it in our practice that we're getting more kind of coaching engagements to help us marry this thing together and let's get it across the finish line. But I do hope that more business owners are considering what they have before they go third party. And I know that shoots myself in the foot, but it really is something you should consider.
Well, for a business sale intermediary, people are coming to visit a broker because they want to sell the business. They want it off their hands into some new person's purview, right? And I think being prepared and able to help people with all the different solutions, I think could be part of the package. And there's some newer structures that people are exploring more with employee ownership. Like you mentioned, selling to an employee. Ever since I got into this business a long time ago, people have been selling to employees or small groups of employees. But now there's these employee ownership trust structures that are available. There are also the worker co-op structures that are available. Some of these may have tax advantages too for a seller. But I think that being ready to talk about all of these potential things with a business owner would certainly be helpful to you. That the employee ownership trusts and worker co-ops are particularly valuable when you've got a large number of employees, but the business struggles to show any kind of goodwill value. And it's, you're on the fence. Do I shut it down? Do I keep it going? Is it really worth much? Is it not? But to be able to help that business carry on in the community, I always point out to people that a marginal business is still providing employment. Those employees are paying income tax. They're all paying property tax. Like there's tremendous value to a community and to the population, even in a business that isn't doing much for its owner. And so if community and legacy are important to you, then it makes sense to explore some of these options rather than simply closing the business.
Tell me about your practice before we kind of wind this thing down. How do you work and what does a day in the life look like for you as far as working with you?
So I run a small boutique consulting firm where I help people buy and sell businesses. And so I work with buyers and sellers and other professionals that have a hand in small business transactions. So we have some standard consulting projects that we do to help value businesses for someone who might want to sell. We also have a consulting project where we evaluate a business from the buyer's perspective, not just about what the business looks like, but what their resources are. So we show people this is what the business is likely going to sell for. This is how it fits with you or does not fit, et cetera. And then we do the certified machinery and equipment appraisal, and we are asked to consult as expert witnesses in different ways. And I've got online education programs about buying and selling businesses too. So anyone who's interested in this stuff, come check out my YouTube channel or podcast. It's every week I'm answering questions from people like the ones in your audience and creating more information.
And so your website is the best place to go hang out, right?
davidcbarnett.com is my blog site, and you can find links to everything else from there. And any place online, if you just search David Barnett Small Business, I'll come right to the top.
It's truly a pleasure, man. I appreciate all the time because you gave me a lot of it.
Oh, thanks, Ed.
Thanks for listening to the Defenders of Business Value. If today's episode helped you think differently about building or selling a business, follow the show so you don't miss what's next. And if you want to become a more informed, confident owner, the one who knows how to grow, protect, and eventually exit at maximum value, subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the show notes. And if you're ready to talk about your next deal, connect with me on LinkedIn. So until next time, we'll see you soon.